Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 86 based on novel. So let's start. Country of Shui, inside the divine snow and ice shrine. Li Yuanfeng was currently sitting in the lotus position and cultivating. Around him were 5 large blocks of ice. Each of these blocks emitted a 5-colored light as well as slivers of celestial spiritual energy for him to absorb. There was a piece of celestial jade the size of a thumbnail inside each block of ice. Thanks to a formation in the ice, the celestial spiritual energy underwent a mysterious change. Li Yuanfeng currently didn't look too bad, but his expression was dim and his face was pale. After a very long time, he opened his eyes and revealed a lingering look of fear. What powerful lightning! That lightning contained celestial spiritual energy. Even though I managed to reduce its power by half before it landed on me, it still managed to cause me such injuries. Li Yuanfeng tried to kill Wang Lin while Sun Tai and the giant demon clan ancestor was fighting. However, he was attacked by Sun Tai's lightning and spent a lot of effort to finally escape. He had only reached the soul transformation stage by force through a secret technique from Suzaku. He had no hope of having a breakthrough in the future. As a result, compared to those cultivators who broke through to the soul transformation stage themselves, he was too weak. Li Yuanfeng was stronger than peak late-stage soul formation cultivators but weaker than true soul transformation cultivators, so there was no way for him to stand up against Sun Tai's lightning. I don't know if Seng Niu died or not. Even if he didn't die, my T-domain is not something that can be broken easily. Li Yuanfeng sneered and his eyes became cold. That junior red butterfly announced that she was going into closed-door cultivation for 100 years. Once she comes out, she will definitely be a soul transformation cultivator. But at that point, my lifespan will have ended and it won't matter anymore. Why did the giant demon clan's ancestor want Seng Niu's body? This is very strange. Could there be something I don't know? Li Yuanfeng pondered a bit but still wasn't able to guess the reason. Inside Pailu, among one of the many mountains used by the soul-refining sect's outer sect disciples, Wang Lin awakened from his cultivation. The peak of the late stage of foundation establishment. Wang Lin's eyes were bright as he took a deep breath and moved his body. The spiritual frost on his body began to move and entered his body. Even the frost on the ground and walls turned into faint, blue gas and was absorbed by Wang Lin. The T mark on Wang Lin's face had faded a bit but was still very shocking. This pseudo-spirit vein eye isn't enough to meet my needs. I need to find a place with even denser spiritual energy. I believe the spot where the real spirit vein eye is located will be enough. Wang Lin rebuilt the formations to cover up the pseudo-spirit vein eye and walked out of the cave. It was sunny outside the cave. Looking into the distance, there was a hint of spring. The mountainsides were green, creating an elegant feel. Although the wind was still cold, it contained a hint of warmth. Wang Lin took a deep breath and was about to leave when his expression changed. He turned to look to the side. There were countless caves near Wang Lin's cave. He had been in closed-door cultivation this entire time, so aside from the middle-aged man, he hadn't met anyone else. Right now, at a cave 100 feet away, another person walked out. This person was wearing light blue clothes made of yarn and had a white veil over their shoulder, giving off a very out-of-this-world feel. A head full of black hair was moving along with the wind. She seemed very gentle and, along with a hint of pink on her cheeks, looked very elegant. This woman seemed to have noticed that someone was looking at her, so she looked over. Her eyes contained an unexplainable beauty. After seeing Wang Lin, she let out a smile as a response and then looked into the distance. Wang Lin withdrew his gaze. He was immediately able to recognize this girl as the person he saw arriving in the sunset. Wang Lin frowned. This girl looks familiar. But I'm confident that I have never seen her before. The Liu Mai from the Xian Dao sect was only an avatar created from the 1000 clone technique. Wang Lin pondered a bit and no longer cared about this girl. Although she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life, even more beautiful than Red Butterfly and someone Li Muwen couldn't even compare to, but she still couldn't attract his attention. He jumped down from the mountain and examined it as he floated down. Then his gaze focused on one of the caves on the mountain. There wasn't anything special about this cave, and it wasn't the lowest one. From a distance, he could see the number 743 on top of the cave's entrance. It should be here. Wang Lin landed and looked at the cave. While he was cultivating, he used the pseudo-spirit vein eye to find where the real spirit vein eye was located. Looking at it now, he was able to immediately determine that cave 743 was one the closest to the real spirit vein eye. There is someone inside. Wang Lin saw that the door of the cave was sealed. After pondering a bit, he came up with a plan. He was about to return to his cave when the middle-aged man walked out of his house. His eyes lit up and he looked toward Wang Lin. In truth, was watching Wang Lin from the moment he came out. The middle-aged man's expression revealed no emotion as he said, "Qian Mu, come here." A trace of killing intent appeared in Wang Lin's eyes. He arrived 10 feet away the middle-aged man. Peak of the late stage of foundation establishment, the middle-aged man's pupils shrank and his heart started beating like crazy. He had a hunch that there was something strange about this Qian Mu. Qian Mu's cultivation speed was too fast. When he got here, he was only at the early stage of foundation establishment. When the middle-aged man next saw him, he was at the mid-stage of foundation establishment. Now that the middle-aged man saw him again, he had already reached the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment. The middle-aged man licked his lips as his heart pounded. He didn't hesitate to think that the next time they meet, this person will have already reached his cultivation level, the early stage of core formation. This Qian Mu either has some heaven-defying treasure or his cultivation method is very mysterious. The middle-aged man stared at Wang Lin and smiled. "Qian Mu, I'm afraid that the next time we meet, I'll have to call you fellow cultivator." Wang Lin glanced at this person and said, "No problem." A hint of ill intent appeared in the middle-aged man's eyes, but he quickly hid it and smiled. "Qian Mu, if you can reach the core formation stage, you will have a good chance in the competition to become a core disciple a few months from now. Once you become a core disciple, you have to remember to come back every now and then." Wang Lin faintly smiled and said, "Of course. But the spiritual energy in my room isn't enough. I wonder if I can change to another one?" The middle-aged man was startled and was a bit embarrassed. The caves numbered under 700 require an elder's permission. However, I can help you apply for it once. Wang Lin shook his head and said, "You don't have to go through that much trouble, I just want cave 743. The middle-aged man looked at cave 743. He laughed and said, "That is no problem, but, Qian Mu, although cave 743 has more spiritual energy, it isn't the best." "No problem." Wang Lin laughed and took out 2 mid-quality spirit stones. "I have constantly had to bother Senior. This extra spirit stone is something to show my respect." After the middle-aged man accepted it, he secretly sneered. "Right now is not the time. But when night comes, no matter how many spirit stones you give me, I'm still going to find out how you cultivate so fast." Although he was thinking about this in his heart, he laughed. He took out a jade, recorded a message, and flicked it. The jade flew out. Under the control of the middle-aged man, it flew into cave 743. After a while, a person flew out from cave 743. He was wearing black and his face was filled with meat. He looked more like a butcher than a cultivator. He landed before the middle-aged man and clasped his hands. "Senior, what do you wish to speak with me about?" The middle-aged man said, "Give me your token. I'm changing your room." "Change caves?" "I'm not changing, I'm cultivating just fine in there." "Why should I change?" This person snorted. His gaze landed on Wang Lin and he sneered. "Are you the brat that wants to change? Give me 100 mid-quality spirit stones or else don't even dream about it." With that, he returned to cave 743 without even looking at the middle-aged man. HMPH. The middle-aged man looked at that man's back. He decided that after he deals with Qian Mu, he will definitely make that person pay. "Qian Mu, you can go back first. I'll find a different cave for you tomorrow." The middle-aged man's voice was filled with determination. He clearly wasn't going to let Wang Lin speak anymore. He waved his sleeve and returned to his house. Wang Lin's expression remained normal as he flew back to his cave. He sneered in his heart. If the middle-aged man doesn't come to bother him, then that means the middle-aged man wasn't destined to die. However, if the middle-aged man gives into greed and comes to him at night, then Wang Lin can only kill him. It was completely silent late at night as the middle-aged man walked out of his house. He looked at Wang Lin's cave and greed filled his eyes. He had been stuck at the early stage of core formation for a very long time, which was why he was kicked out of the inner sect to become a steward for the outer sect disciples. Wang Lin's cultivation speed gave him a sliver of hope. The sect doesn't care about the life and death of outer sect disciples at all, so it'll be fine if I kill him. This person is also a rogue cultivator, so after he dies, no one will search for him. Qianmu, don't blame me, blame yourself for cultivating too fast. If I wait until you reach the core formation stage, it will be difficult to deal with you, but right now it will be as simple as waving my hand. The middle-aged man flew toward Wang Lin's cave and arrived outside of it in the blink of an eye. The surroundings were completely silent and the middle-aged man was stunned. Normally, when someone was in closed-door cultivation, the door would be completely sealed, but Wang Lin's door was only half closed. Having eliminated the need to use the jade to open the door, the middle-aged man bravely entered the cave. Although he found it strange, he didn't think a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator would be his match, so he entered the cave. The moment he entered the cave, he saw Wang Lin sitting on the bed calmly looking at him. The middle-aged man's eyes lit up and without a word his hand formed a seal. He silently shot out a ray of spiritual energy toward Wang Lin. He didn't want to kill Wang Lin now, he wanted to capture him and question him before ending his life. Wang Lin's eyes revealed a mocking expression. He slapped his bag of holding and took out the restriction flag. He shook the flag and then a ray of restriction light shot out of it and collided with the ray of spiritual energy. The spiritual energy immediately collapsed. You courting death? The middle-aged man sneered and spat out a 3-inch-long sword. He held the sword and charged toward the restriction gas. In his mind, this late-stage Foundation establishment junior couldn't withstand the power of this flying sword that had been refined by his golden core. But his smile froze. The moment the flying sword touched the restriction gas, a cracking sound could be heard. The sword broke in half straight down the middle. Wang Lin, who was on the stone bed, shook his head and sighed. When I started cultivating, you weren't even born yet. The middle-aged man's face was pale and he coughed out blood. Without any hesitation, he turned around to leave, but the restriction gas quickly caught him and dragged him back. The middle-aged man opened his mouth to speak, but after a slap from Wang Lin, he let out a miserable groan and coughed out a mouthful of blood along with some broken teeth. I'm from the soul refining sect, the middle-aged man was terrified from the pain. But before he finished speaking, Wang Lin slapped him again. A hint of madness entered the middle-aged man's eyes. He had never been humiliated like this since he started cultivating. I'll fight to the end. The middle-aged man shouted, and then cracks appeared on his golden core. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Wang Lin. It would be a waste to let your golden core explode. Wang Lin shook the restriction flag in his hand and 3 branches of restriction gas immediately shot out. In the blink of eye, they entered the middle-aged man's body and wrapped around his golden core. To the middle-aged man's shock, his golden core was torn out of his body. Wang Lin grabbed the golden core and swallowed it. The middle-aged man's body trembled. He coughed out blood and his body weakened. He screamed in his heart, he is not at the Foundation establishment stage. He is not a Foundation establishment cultivator. All of his spiritual energy was being drained from his body. He clenched his teeth and managed to squeeze out, "You, who exactly are you? You don't deserve to know." Wang Lin arrived before the middle-aged man and pointed at his brow. The middle-aged man's eyes widened before they lost their color and he fell down. Wang Lin shook his head. He didn't want to kill, but this person forced him to. He hit the middle-aged man's body with his hand and the entire body turned to ashes and disappeared. Wang Lin walked out of the cave and charged toward cave 743. Outside of cave 743, Wang Lin waved his hand to shoot a restriction at the door. Then his body turned into a ray of white light and charged toward the door. The moment he touched the door, his body disappeared. When he reappeared, he was inside cave 743. The reason he was able to get through was because of that restriction. Who? A gasp came from inside the cave. The butcher-looking guy was sitting on the stone bed with a look of disbelief on his face. But after seeing that it was Wang Lin, he became angry, but he suddenly felt like cold water was being poured over him. He didn't know that Wang Lin had entered through a restriction, so the only thing he could think of was teleportation. Sen. Senior, his voice was trembling. Before he could say more, Wang Lin arrived before him. Wang Lin pointed at the butcher-looking guy's brow, causing him to pass out. After throwing the person to the side, Wang Lin didn't even bother to look at him. His eyes fell on the right wall. Shortly after, Wang Lin slapped his bag of holding and a flying sword appeared. He pointed at the wall and the flying sword cut into it. The sounds of stone being smashed filled the room and soon, a hole big enough for a person to crawl through appeared. Wang Lin entered the hole after the flying sword. With the flying sword opening a path, Wang Lin followed. The tunnel went on for more than 300 feet, and at the end of the tunnel was a room that was glowing gold. Spirit vein or deposit. Wang Lin's eyes lit up. He was filled with joy. He pointed at the flying sword, which let out to him as if it had intelligence, and it quickly went back through the tunnel. In the blink of an eye, it arrived back in cave 743 and stabbed into the ground next to the butcher-like cultivator. The sword instantly exploded into pieces that formed a restriction, trapping the butcher-like cultivator inside. Wang Lin pressed on the wall at the entrance and the walls of the tunnel began to move. Soon, the tunnel behind him disappeared without a trace. Even looking from inside cave 743, one wouldn't be able to see anything wrong. Wang Lin's right hand formed a seal and he placed a restriction on the spirit vein or deposit. This was the same restriction he had used to get inside cave 743. He charged into the deposit and reappeared deep within it. Now he was in the depths of the mountain. There were countless spirit stone deposits surrounding him, creating a powerful surge of spiritual energy. This spiritual energy couldn't be directly absorbed by cultivators because there was too much impurity inside it. It needed to be converted before cultivators could absorb it. However, this only applied to low-level cultivators, so Wang Lin didn't care at all. The density of spiritual energy here had reached such a degree that it created a pressure similar to what powerful cultivators could create. However, this was all just natural spiritual energy, so it couldn't compare to the pressure a cultivator emitted. Wang Lin was immediately affected by the pressure once he charged in. This pressure felt like an entire mountain pressing down upon him. However, this mountain wasn't just pressing from above, it pressed Wang Lin's body from all sides. Crackling sounds came from inside his body as a result. Instead of being worried, Wang Lin was extremely happy. This was exactly the pressure he was looking for. Under this pressure, he could feel his shattered origin soul beginning to reform. I'm going all the way. He slapped his bag of holding and 3 top-quality spirit stones flew out. Wang Lin took a deep breath before letting out a roar and then the 3 top-quality spirit stones all exploded. An insane amount of spiritual energy exploded forth and fused with the surrounding spiritual energy. The pressure Wang Lin was feeling suddenly increased several-fold. Wang Lin bled from his orifices, but his eyes were filled with joy. Still need a bit more. Wang Lin clenched his teeth and 2 more top-quality spirit stones appeared and exploded. As if adding a spoonful of water into boiling oil, the spirit vein went crazy. The pressure on Wang Lin's body increased greatly. Under this powerful pressure, the shattered pieces of Wang Lin's origin soul were slowly condensing like pieces of a shattered mirror being put back together. At the same time, an unimaginable amount of spiritual energy entered Wang Lin's body. Even the T-domain and seal couldn't stop it. Wang Lin's cultivation began to recover at an extremely quick pace. Breakthrough to the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment. Core formation, complete. Breakthrough to the early stage core formation. Breakthrough to the mid stage. Breakthrough to the late stage. Breakthrough to the early of stage nascent soul. The spirit vein's core began to dim and the spirit stone deposits turned to dust which rapidly spread. 10 breaths. Only 10 breaths. In just 10 breaths of time, all of the trees growing on the mountain wilted. The entire spirit vein inside the mountain dimmed and disappeared in just 10 breaths of time. The entire mountain was now a useless spirit vein. At this moment, thousands of outer sect disciples that were cultivating inside this mountain opened their eyes. They all noticed the spiritual energy inside their rooms disappear. After that, a powerful suction force came from below them, sucking away the spiritual energy inside their bodies. Terrified, all of the outer sect disciples used various methods to leave the caves. They no longer dared to stay within them. In the spirit vein deep inside the mountain, Wang Lin suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately teleported and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already outside the mountain. There were outer sect disciples all around him. They were all talking with shock and fear on their faces. All Wang Lin could hear was speculation about the strange event that had just taken place. As for that butcher-like cultivator, Wang Lin controlled the shattered sword to release the restriction to let him come out. When the butcher-like cultivator saw Wang Lin, he immediately became terrified. However, with one cold glance from Wang Lin, he immediately became respectful and no longer dared to make any noise. Just at this moment, a gaze was cast upon him. He turned his head and saw that beautiful woman looking at him with a friendly smile. Wang Lin frowned. He didn't have time to deal with this woman. He glanced coldly at her and then withdrew his gaze. Peak of the mid-stage of nascent soul. I didn't expect that my action just now would allow me to recover to this level of cultivation. And along with this, my origin soul has begun to recover. Although it is not completely healed, I can now use my domain. Wang Lin took a deep breath. His eyes were calm. However, compared to all of this, the life-to-death and death-to-life experience he gained was even more important. The huge change in the mountain attracted the attention of the inner sect. 3 people came out. One of them was a white-haired elder who emitted a pressure without even being angry. He shouted, "All of you, shut up!" The surroundings suddenly became silent. The old man shouted, "Where is Liu Fulin?" After a long time, no one responded. The old man frowned, then he looked at the 2 next to him and the 3 of them flew toward the mountain. Liu Fulin was the middle-aged man that got greedy. As for the 3 of them, they were inner disciples of the soul-refining sect and also the deacons of the outer sect. Wang Lin's eyes faintly lit up. The old man was at the early stage of nascent soul while the other 2 were both at the late stage of core formation. The 3 of them flew into the mountain, but only the old man flew out. He had a very ugly expression on his face. His eyes were filled with confusion but even more filled with shock. The old man's eyes lit up and he shouted, "You outer sect disciples can just cultivate here. None of you are allowed to leave." Then he took out a piece of jade, recorded some information, and threw it. The jade turned into a ray of light and flew into the inner sect. The majority of the outer sect disciples were startled, but there were a few that sat down and cultivated. Wang Lin was one of them. He sat on a giant tree and cultivated. After the old man arrived, he carefully scanned each of the outer sect disciples. When he went into the mountain with his fellow sect members earlier, they were terrified the moment they found out that the entire spirit vein had been wasted. When they went deep into the spirit vein and reached the ores turned to dust the moment they touched them. This occurs when the spiritual energy is sucked out of them too quickly. This whole thing was very strange. He had never heard of or seen anything like this happening since the soul-refining sect was formed. His gaze swept past each of the disciples one by one. He didn't pause on Wang Lin at all. In his eyes, Wang Lin was only at the late stage of foundation establishment. He was not worth noting. Because Wang Lin's origin soul had recovered a bit, no one below the soul formation stage could see through his cultivation. Not long after, more than 10 rays of light flew out of the inner sect and arrived before the old man in the blink of an eye. When they landed, the rays of light became 10 people. Among them were 5 nascent soul cultivators while the rest were at least at the mid-stage of core formation. One of the middle-aged scholars was at the late stage of nascent soul. He was wearing a black robe and emitted a cold aura like there were countless vengeful ghosts surrounding him. The moment he appeared, the surroundings immediately became cold. His eyes were like lightning as he coldly looked at the mountain and said, "Junior apprentice brother, what exactly happened for you to send that jade?" The old man from before immediately became respectful and said, "Third senior apprentice brother, the spirit vein in this mountain was sucked dry in almost an instant. I suspect it had something to do with these outer sect disciples." The middle-aged man's eyes lit up and he shouted, "Seal off the surroundings. If anyone dares to leave, kill them. Junior apprentice brother, follow me up the mountain to meet the sect master." With that, he turned into a ray of light and charged toward the inner sect. The old man quickly followed and the 2 of them entered the inner sect in the blink of an eye. Wang Lin's expression remained calm as he coldly looked at the guards. If he were to call out the mosquito beast, he would be able to escape in an instant. However, the beast was his last resort, and he didn't want to give up such a good cultivation ground. Although his origin soul had recovered a bit, it hadn't been completely reformed yet. He tried to call out the heaven-defying bead but wasn't able to. Wang Lin pondered for a bit and didn't do anything reckless. Some light came from the horizon as the sun appeared, covering the land with warmth. The light dispelled the darkness. As the surroundings gradually lit up, the middle-aged scholar flew out from the inner sect. Following behind him were 9 people. All 9 of them were wearing red robes. Their ages varied, but the one thing they had in common was that they were all surrounded by large, vengeful souls. Looking at them from a distance, in front of the light of the sun, it looked like they were surrounded by demonic flames that reached the sky. With a gloomy expression, the middle-aged scholar shouted, "Split into 10 groups to be inspected." The 9 red-robed people behind him moved and all activated a technique at the same time. Red gas poured from their sleeves and surrounded each of the thousands of outer sect disciples that were standing outside. The outer sect disciples were split into 10 groups against their will. Along with the middle-aged man, each of them took charge of one group and called the outer sect disciples one by one for inspection. They didn't even need to ask any questions, they simply pointed at the brow of each outer sect disciple and a few breaths later they would move on to the next person. Wang Lin was split into the third group. His eyes were calm without any trace of panic or abnormality. These 9 people in red were all only at the mid-stage of nascent soul, so Wang Lin didn't consider them threats at all. Whenever an outer sect disciple passed, they would let out a sigh of relief. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became increasingly oppressive. Just at this moment, a green-robed cultivator in the 4th group moved like lightning and attempted to escape. The surrounding inner sect disciples were constantly on guard, so the moment this person tried to escape, a core formation disciple moved to attempt to stop that person. Scram! The green-robed cultivator shouted, as he waved his hand, creating a powerful force. The core formation disciple groaned and his body was pushed to the side. Without a word, the green-robed cultivator turned back around and rushed toward the opening. Just as he was about to make it out, the red-robed cultivator in charge of Group 4 reached out with his hands. Come back! 5 rays of black light suddenly flew out of his fingers. They moved like lightning and in the blink of an eye drilled into the body of the green-robed cultivator. The green-robed cultivator let out a miserable groan and his body went soft. The red-robed cultivator dragged him back and threw him into the open space in the middle of all the groups. After that, the red-robed cultivator didn't even look at the green-robed cultivator and said, "Next person, come up." All of the outer sect disciples were filled with fear, especially those that came with some bad intentions. Their faces became ugly upon seeing what had just happened. At this moment, the eyes of red-robed cultivator in charge of Group 8 lit up as he looked at the pale-faced disciple before him who had an expression like he was begging for mercy. The red-robed cultivator grabbed the disciple and threw him into the opening in the middle of all the groups. The amount of people in the middle gradually increased, there were now over 30 of them. The red-robed cultivator in charge of the 3rd group threw the disciple before him to the middle and slowly said, "This is normally only done for disciples entering the inner sect, but today it is being used on you outer disciples, so you should all feel proud." Wang Lin's expression remained calm, but his heart was shocked. The soul-refining sect had so many outer sect disciples that came with ill intentions, but none of them could escape this kind of inspection. As for the butcher-like cultivator who was originally in Cave 743, Wang Lin wasn't worried about him. He had already placed a restriction in that cultivator. Although Wang Lin's cultivation level had dropped, the complexity of his restrictions was not something these nascent soul cultivators could see through. In Wang Lin's eyes, this person was kind of interesting. Although the butcher-like cultivator was at the late stage of foundation establishment on the surface, he was really at the pseudo-core formation stage. But it wasn't too weird for outer sect disciples to hide their cultivation levels. "You, come up." The red-robed cultivator in charge of Group 5 pointed at the butcher-like cultivator. The butcher-like cultivator's body trembled as he quickly went up. The red-robed cultivator pointed at the butcher-like cultivator's brow and then, after a few seconds, he waved his hand. The butcher-like cultivator let out a sigh of relief and didn't dare to look at Wang Lin. He was currently in a state of shock and confusion. When that finger landed on his brow, he felt something cold enter his body. It felt like there was a giant hand going through his memories. This feeling left as soon as it came. Before he could clearly feel what it was, the cold energy left. Not long after, it was Wang Lin's turn. The red-robed cultivator in charge of Group 3 pointed at Wang Lin's brow, then shortly after he said, "Next." Wang Lin calmly walked to the side. More than 1,000 disciples were inspected by noon. More than 100 of them had been thrown into the middle. The middle-aged man threw the last person into the middle and asked, "Did you guys find anything?" One of the red-robed cultivators coldly said, "Aside from these people who have their own objectives, nothing related to the matter last night." The remaining 9 cultivators all shook their heads. The middle-aged scholar pondered a bit before ordering, "You outer sect disciples go cultivate at the other mountains. There will be someone who will assign rooms to each of you." The outer sect disciples who passed the test all respectfully bowed before flying toward different mountains. As for the more than 100 cultivators in the middle, no one glanced back at them and no one cared about what would become of them. Wang Lin was given a cave in a slightly smaller mountain nearby. He sat inside the cave cultivating, his eyes sparkling all the while. My cultivation has recovered to the mid-stage of nascent soul. Although the effect of absorbing a spirit vein is good, it is simply too dangerous. If I continue, I might lure out soul formation cultivators or even soul transformation monsters. I have already caught their attention, so I can't do anything too big. However, when I was absorbing the spirit vein, I found out that there is an even bigger, main spirit vein nearby. The spirit vein I absorbed was only a branch. That main spirit vein should be under the inner sect of the soul refining sect. If I can go there to cultivate, I should be able to recover my cultivation in one go. At that moment, even if I am found out and a soul transformation cultivator comes, I will still be able to escape. If worse comes to worst, I'll rip open space and escape using the star compass. Wang Lin pondered a bit. He knew that the soul refining sect was located in a rank 5 cultivation country, meaning there were soul transformation cultivators in the sect. After thinking for a while, he made up his mind. This video will end here.